Hi everyone, Fleethany Wood Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of this new Grae and Quelle Chris album, Everything's Fine. This is a new collaborative album from two of my favorite underground rappers, Grae and Quelle Chris. Chris is an abstract hip-hop artist who really kind of pushes the boundaries of that label. He struck me back in 2013 with a record that I thought had something really special on it, his album Ghost at the Finish Line. An album that didn't feel like it was filled with songs so much as impressions of songs, but songs that, despite their lack of structure and despite a lack of energy on the part of Chris as a performer, still had a lot of very sharp, unique, weird ideas, interesting song topics. There were these autobiographical, very vulnerable and self-analytical tracks on here like Loop Dreams, where Chris was rapping at length about his attempts to make it in hip-hop music and maybe not doing so well in the process. Then there were moments on this album that were exaggerated and hilarious, like Super Fuck, which is still one of my favorite songs. Period. Then there were some spots on this album that were super sharp and satirical, like Chris had a very clear idea in mind of a target, which he was kind of parodying on the song Coke Rap War Game. It wouldn't be until a handful of years down the road when Chris would drop a record that I thought was even better, and that was last year's Being You Is Great. Very cerebral, very heady rap album filled with these woozy and eclectic instrumentals, which occasionally had like a bit of a cartoony tone to them, all of which paired very well with Chris's very low-key, almost monotone, kind of nasal, very froggy voice. It's kind of the story of the guy with the softest voice having the loudest brain, because even though he's not the most in-your-face rapper, a lot of his instrumental ideas are totally whacked, a lot of his lyrics are insanely witty, and Chris has paired up with his partner in life, and his partner on this album, Grae, a rapper who I've been waiting for a long time to hear some more substantial records from. Because in the mid and late 2000s, she had some very good records, Genius and This Week, but her output this decade so far has mostly been very low-key, very scattered, super independent, super DIY, Bandcamp releases like her That's Not How You Do That series. In general, Jean is just not a rapper who we hear enough from. She spits like a demon. She has a great sense of wordplay, fantastic voice, she's a good singer as well. She has personality and a talent level that is just too high to be squandered. So I'm happy to hear she's playing a large role on this album and that her and Chris are collaborating in a big way on this record. I guess they had an EP back in 2016 that somehow slipped by me, but Everything's Fine is about an hour long, and the flow and the vibe of this album, for frame of reference, isn't really that much different than Being You Is Great. And jumping off of that, I could see Mad Villain fans and MF Doom fans and fans of the early output on Stones Throw Records getting into this record pretty heavy. But while appreciating those references and inspiration points, you have to respect the fact that Jean and Chris go into some pretty odd territory with these sounds. So while this record isn't that much different than Chris's recent work, it does have a dynamic and a theme all its own, and a personality too. I mean, you cannot really get into this album without having a very sharp and a very dry sense of humor. I mean, this thing is a mix of irony and just kind of poking fun at a lot of sensitive spots in society, but then they also mix that with some incredible moments of vulnerability. The opening sketch of this record pretty much illustrates the theme of this record. You have this fake game show and all the contestants, in response to every question, need to say, everything's fine, everything's okay, everything is all right in the world, nothing is getting worse, there's nothing to worry about. And it's that cynicism that carries over onto the next track, My Contribution to This Scam, a track that features this very slow, lo-fi, psychedelic beat, and Chris and Jean trade bars about like Instagram models, backpack rappers, way mint, hey sistar femc. I mean, if you take Chris's refrain toward the back end of the track where he's saying, get tooken, get tooken, get tooken, you can pretty much see the theme of this track is false prophets, people misleading you, hive mind, stupid trends. And what's funny about this track, and many others on here, is that it sounds and it feels like a song. It's catchy. I love listening to it, but there's also an element to it that feels like I'm also listening to a skit. It's like part skit, but part song. It's like I don't know, a Cheech and Chong record for a nerdy millennial rap fan who wears glasses that are too big. Because Chris and Gene, like good comedians on this track, they're just shitting on everybody. They're shitting on everybody. And really, that's kind of how it goes for a bulk of the album. I mean, take the track Gold, Purple, Orange, which features this lengthy verse from Chris where he's just going at all these different stereotypes, bringing up things like the alt-right and black dicks and old people, independent women as well. Grae contrasts this with a verse that seems like it's all about her growing up. It's sort of like taking these absolutist assertions and assumptions about a variety of things and then taking that and juxtaposing it with a very detailed story, a very nuanced story about a particular person. And the instrumental on this song is pretty unique. It sort of leaves me feeling like a little anxious, like I'm locked in some kind of loop or something that I just can't escape out of. It's a very sour jazz groove with these wandering saxophones that are pretty nice. But yeah, again, the track feels like I'm caught in a mental feedback loop. I love the track House Call, which feels kind of like a lo-fi, warped, mutant version of West Coast G-Funk, which comes complete with a hilarious Boo Radley reference, as well as a line saying, they ain't trying to ride on us, we're like cobblestones. Also, Anna Wise and Jonathan Hord's vocals on this track are amazing. It sort of sounds like a weirder version of some of the vocal freakouts that you might have caught on like an early Goody Mob record or like an early CeeLo Green album. I love the soulful, low-key, and determined track Peacock on the record. The chord progression on this track is amazing, and it's performed by these intensely ringing synthesizers, topped of course with Jean Grae's very melodic flow. It's a good pairing. Not to mention this is one of the few tracks on the record that actually takes a very serious and dark tone when it comes to some of the social issues brought up on this thing. The song The Smoking Man, from what I can gather from the few verses held within it, deals with paranoia, accusations, conspiracies, erratic behavior, and the song River is a great ending to this record. The strings are killer. Jean Grae's verse on this track is one of the more personal and emotionally potent on the entire record. There are a few bangers on the record too, like the very aggressive and hard-hitting Zero with this buzzing bass line, very punchy percussion, and Jean Grae's opening verse on this track is pretty incredible too. And then there's Osh with Hannibal Buress, which if I had to make a guess as to what the mind state was that he was recording that verse in, I would have to guess it was just totally drunk out of his mind. Although this is one of a few tracks on the record where it feels like the feature is really what makes the song, like the Denmark Vesey appearance on this record is really good. Also, Jorl Droog on this album is pretty great too. He's on the song Scoop of Dirt, and I love this one line when he talks about how him and his friends are making music and they're jamming it, and then he slaps a phone out of someone's hand for Shazamming it. Then he's talking about his gut and his hunchback posture, and then a few lines later, like his butt crack showing. He just like did almost this entire verse just about how like in bad shape he is, and yet it sounded so fucking hard. There were a couple of skits on the album that I think did a decent job of keeping up the theme of the record, maybe even better than some of the songs on the album did. Although I will say doing better than ever the story on that track about calling your mom and then like not wanting to be embarrassed about talking to your mom, it was kind of a weird moment on the record that still now at this point the necessity of it eludes me. Waiting on the Moon I found to be one of the blander tracks on the record. It's very light, jazzy instrumental, didn't do too much for me. And then Breakfast of Champions, while I love the refrain on that track and a lot of Jean Grae's lyrics too, the kind of fuzzy production that just smothers her and Chris's vocals, to me was a low point on the album, kind of took the excitement or the teeth of the bite out of the track in a way. Overall though, I think Everything's Fine is a really good set of tracks, way more hits than misses, definitely one of the more fun, weird, unique, eclectic, and smart hip-hop records I've heard this year. I wish maybe there were more topical tracks on here, and there are a few songs as well that don't even feature Jean Grae to begin with, unfortunately. Just a few, but still. I will say though, for what was a very unlikely artistic match, at least to me from the outset, this album just goes swimmingly. And as collaborators, I would love to hear more from Chris and Jean in the future, because in an odd way, even though their rap styles seem to have so little in common, it's a bit of a yin and yang situation, because the low-key and I guess very even-tempered demeanor of one complements the more cold-blooded and animated and aggressive personality type of the other. I'm feeling a decent to strong 8 on this thing. Transition, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best. You're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe, and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. And over here next to my head is another video you can check out. Hit that up, or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Jean Grae, Quelle Chris, forever.